The bake master. That's the guy who calls the shots and tells when you should start the fire, when the fire is hot enough, how much weed, the clams, the canvases, do you wet it, do you don't wet it? And it's quite a responsibility.
It's an art to be able to take all of that food and in a short time period to have all that food come out and serve it all hot, all cooked.
When we come out here in 1958, there was a fellow named Ray Collins. He worked there his whole life, and that was his job, the bake master. And it was passed on to him by Mr. Francis. And then, of course, my grandfather always put on bakes. He could do it. But right now, all three of my sons can put on bakes. And preparing the food is a 3 or 4 hour project in itself. They wash the clams, which takes 3 or 4 hours to do. They soak them. We have a process that we use here to help clean them.
And you're actually taking your hands and just jumping them up and down. If you only do one washing, it's not going to get all the sand out, so that when you have your bake, you're going to have this little sand grip. So 3 times is usually the best.
We like to buy Maine clams if possible. They're less sandy. Most of the time they're mud clams. In some cases Canada, or even native Rhode Island clams. But native Rhode Island clams used to be on the sandy side. We start from scratch. We build a bake on a hard surface. We use fire brick, and we start with a cradle of wood and rocks, or now we're using steel ingots. They're reusable.
The wood has been coming from our own property because of the expansion of the pavilions and halls.
We get through about 60 cords, average year. It's kind of a land management program that we have going here. And the idea is to light this fire, which takes about an hour and a half to burn off the wood. And at that point, the rocks or ingots reach a heat temperature of about 1,400 degrees.
See where the red dot is? We're about 1,100 degrees right there. So they range anywhere from 1,100 to 1,400 degrees.
At that point, those rocks are spread out evenly on the ground. When you're putting 20, 30, 40 bushels of clams on, that's a huge, huge pile of hot rocks or hot ingots. Getting close to that area to work it to level the stones is very difficult. You've got to know what you're doing. You've got to work safely. You've got to work. You got to know how to work around that type of thing. On top of that, we put rockweed that is gathered right here in Newport. So we'll go down and gather it right off the rocks once a week. We pick the rockweed all throughout this area. The boat actually goes out, the skiff goes out where those rocks are, way over at the other side where it's more plentiful. So Luke, working hard. I did this in early 60s when I was young, and now Kenny and his brothers, they're carrying on the tradition here.
This whole cove, it's all full of rocks. So what we just kind of got an off-beat path. We never pick any of the rocks with all the seaweed on them now, just so we don't wreck our boat. Because my GPS system up front really isn't the best. He's real chatty, but oh, you gotta get ready to. It's easier to pick the seaweed in the water. Yeah, it's easy to cut. It's easy to grab some like bigger pieces.
I'm with you, Dad.
You on the same page today?
Yeah.
by the Francis Farm has the best clambakes in the world.
Depending on the amount of parties that are happening, we'll gather it all up, put it in bags, and bring it back. On top of the rockweed, we put our food, which is the clams, fish, onions, sausage, dressing, corn while it's in season. And we cover that with canvases. If the temperature is right and you put the right amount of rockweed, the right amount of canvases, it takes an hour.